There we go. That should work. Sorry about that. So good morning, and today's demo is going to be painting some northern lights. I'm also going to be including some mountains, which is a great technique for you to be able to learn. And maybe you've done before, maybe you haven't, but this will be fun to learn. So I don't have a reference picture for this one here. When you're doing northern lights, it's really hard to try to make it exactly like your photos. And it's kind of fun sometimes to be working without the reference and just basically working from your imagination and letting things happen on the paper that just happen, right? So that's kind of fun. Yeah, sorry, the sound wasn't working at the beginning. Every time I have an update or something on my computer, out goes the sound. So sometimes I forget to put that back. Anyway, sorry about that. I'll edit that part out at the beginning. So we're going to be using Arch's 140-pound cold press paper. I want to have an 8x10 out of this. So my paper's a little bit bigger, and I pre-stretched it. So I soaked it for 3 minutes and I stapled it down. I let it dry. Then I put the tape on the sides. This is 100% cotton paper. And I think that that's a really important surface to be working on for this particular technique. I'm also going to be using a little fan brush, a great big brush that holds lots of paint and water. I'm going to be using a little bit of a small palette knife. This one's got a crook handle, but the important thing about this one, it's got a flat edge here. That's what is important about this particular one. You could also use something like a credit card, something that we're going to be using for scraping. All right, so I am going to start off. I have soaked all of my colors. If you don't have the same colors as I do, then don't worry about it. It will be fine. I just need to, it's knocked everything out here, this this recent update. So let me just turn this on again. I just have to turn it off and turn it on again. It's the dumbest thing, but there we go. Okay, so now we're live again. I don't know why that happens, but knocks everything out. All right, so first of all, the colors for the northern lights. One of my favorite combinations is to use some cerulean blue. So I'm going to have some cerulean blue ready. I've got some Hooker's Green Dark color. And I'll be using some of that and rinse that out of my brush because I don't want to contaminate my yellow. And I'm going to go into some Aureolin. All right, so those are going to be the colors I'm going to be using for my northern lights. And I'm going to start off by wetting my paper. One other thing you will be needing if you're painting along with this, you're going to need a spray bottle. So let me just fill this up a little bit more. Okay, a spray bottle is going to be very useful. This one's got a fairly fine mist. Make sure that your spray bottle has a fine mist. If it doesn't have that, you're going to end up with kind of little spots everywhere. So my big brush, I'm going to wet my paper. Now I did get a little color on there, but that's okay. None of that will end up showing in the end. I've got a lot to cover over all of that. This was one of the most popular requests that I had this particular year because this past summer, at least, there were numerous sightings of northern lights in places that you don't normally see them, even locally here in southern Ontario. So because a lot of people had seen them, I think that's why we've had a lot of requests for this particular subject. So that is really wet. I've got a really good glossy shine on here, and you can see it's really wet. If I tip it, it's going to really pool in one end. So I'm just going to start throwing in some colors. I'm going to start with my cerulean. Here, there, or anywhere. That's the fun of this, I think, just to put your colors any which way. Mix them together if you like. And maybe some of the yellows, put some of those in there. They all turn out different. Every time you do this, it's something a little bit different, which is what I love. Now, in my example that I showed you, I actually had reflections of water in the bottom. So I have mountains, but I have the mountains reflecting. I think for this particular example, I'm going to do a combination of some reflection and some not. I like to mix it up and make my paintings a little bit different every time. So you could do this 100 times and every one would be a little bit different. So I've got like a little bit of color everywhere. Really get all that out of my brush. Wiping off my tape. If you don't wipe off your tape, this is a habit that I see a lot of students neglecting, is that if you don't wipe your tape off and this starts drying, because this is going to dry faster than your tape, and what's on the tape is going to take a lot longer because of course it's on a surface that's not absorbent. So I want to be able to make sure that the beads of paint or whatever on the sides don't end up rolling back into my semi-drying paper and creating blossoms where I don't want them. All right, so you can see how it's gathering at the bottom here. I'm just going to just start sopping that up with my paper towel. This paper towel is going to end up fully saturated by the time I'm done, but you see that streaking that's happening? That's actually gorgeous. So I'm going to tip it the other way so it'll, start streaming back in the other direction. I can even go side to side a little bit here. You can see the paint is obviously still running quite nicely. All right, so I think a little bit more color would be good here. I like the color. I think it could be a little stronger, so I'm just going to put in a little bit more. If you're doing a reflection, you might want to try to think of making it a mirror image. Like say this is where my horizon's going to be. I might want to, if I've got dark up here, I want to put the same kind of coloring below to make it look like a reflection. So maybe I'll do that. Some of the Hooker's Green Dark. So much of this is wet color. Okay, so just wipe it again. I want to make sure that when I'm working on wet paper, I'm putting enough color down. Big rookie mistake, including my own mistake when I was new to watercolor, is I wasn't getting enough color on my wet paper. And what happens is that it ends up diluting the color you're putting down. And by the time it dries, it is like crazy light by comparison. So let's take a slightly smaller brush and I'm going to go into my Payne's Gray. Now the Payne's Gray is going to be my outer space, right? My sky at night. These are the lights, and I'm going to just roll this around a little bit more before I start applying. The paper's beginning to wrinkle a little bit. So the paint's tendency is to want to fall down into the valleys, right? Where the paint's not, where the low spots where the paint's going to gather. So I'm still going to keep sopping up some of this color. Okay, but I still want to be able to work with wet color when I'm putting my next part on. So this technique is like really easy, but it's at the same time, it's just a little tricky because you have to time it right. So you can see I've still got a good glossy wet surface, but it's not dripping as much anymore because I've let it run off to the sides and I've sopped up all my tape and my edges and things like that. Now I want to come into some really dark color. So I want to go with my Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray can be a really dark color, and I want to get it just about as rich as I can get it, not straight out of the tube where it's actually thick and creamy, but as pigmented as I can make it. And I'm going to do some swirls. So now these swirls obviously can go in any direction. You know, Northern Lights don't have a pattern to them. They just are pretty random. So I'm just going to do some swirlies and we'll see how this turns out. Never know exactly how it's going to turn out. Now I'm doing my mirror. Right? I want to put my horizon here. So I'm doing my mirror image of what's above. So something like that, I think. Let's get a little bit more color in some of this. It's already starting to get a little bit lighter because the water on the surface is already starting to dilute this color a little bit. So I want to make sure I've got lots on here. And you can see it's bleeding, but it's not bleeding out of control because I made sure that what was in my brush isn't overly wet, right? I'm putting it on a damp surface, so I need to make sure my brush is drier than the damp surface. So I'm going to wipe off my tape. And tilt. Okay, so I want the paint to run down as much as possible. You can see it starting now. If it doesn't run, here's where you can hold your spray bottle fairly far back, not close. You'll run into trouble for sure if you do it close, but maybe just a little bit at the top. And I want that to run down, and I'm going to tilt this and just let this sort of flow naturally. If it's a spot like here where it's not running as much as I want, just spray that spot a little bit more. So I'm going to just let this flow around a little bit. I don't want all of my gaps to close in. That's the important part here. Don't let them close in completely because you need to have those in order for this to work. Those are your actual Northern Lights. So just going to bring some of that across there. Let that flow down. Whoop, not too much. You can control how far it flows by how much you're tilting. Right? So if it's starting to come down and, oh my gosh, it's coming too far, well then lay it down so it doesn't flow anymore. It will still keep melting and you'll still get this beautiful feeling of the Northern Lights. And when the shine begins to go away, so that's what's going to happen, is the shine will start to go away. And that's the point when you can take your dryer out and dry it. I don't want to stop it just yet. I still want some of this to mix and mingle a little bit. I love that sort of streaming light effect here. I find that that's really quite lovely. All right, I like that. Maybe flow a little bit in the other direction, just tipping it the other way. It's not moving very fast, but it is moving. Let's just move my mic out of the way a little bit. I think I'm probably a little too close. There we go. Okay, so I think that that's getting quite nice now. You'll never know exactly how it's going to turn out until it starts to dry. Are my color choices based on artistic preference, or do Northern Lights not have any red hues? Sometimes they do. You can put pinks in here. Actually, you can make it almost any color you want. There are a lot of colors to Northern Lights. I've used this combination quite frequent because it's probably one of the more common color combinations that you see. But yeah, put some pink in, especially a hot pink like a opera or opus or something like that, where it's that almost fluorescent kind of pink is amazing. So different parts of the world have red, but not all. Oh, I didn't know that, Beverly. Thank you. As this is the last session before Christmas, I like. Oh, thank you very much. Is it the last one before? It's not the last one before Christmas. There's one more, surely. I hope there is. Okay, so I can see the shine is starting to die down. I'm going to speed this up a little bit with my dryer. The important part about this first step is getting the colors to flow, but not blend so much that it turns muddy. So Beverly says higher altitudes like Denali, Alaska. Oh, okay, that's good to know. Yeah, so I guess some of those regions will get more red. I did not know that. This color combination, the cerulean, the Hooker's Green Dark, or Viridian would be also another good choice there. The yellow, great typical Northern Light combinations. Okay, now you can see as I'm drying this how much lighter the sky is getting. I want to make sure this is fully dry before I go on to my next step. That's going to be very important. So just bear with me for a few minutes while I do this. Meanwhile, I can show you another sort of finished example that I did. Okay, so this is one that I did with a reflection. I didn't do as many swirlies in the sky, but you can see how I reflected it by mirroring the Northern Lights into the water, that sort of thing. I had to echo of course, the trees and the mountains. So that gave me kind of a nice combination. Now, I've often said this in my other demos, that if you want your light to look light, make your darks look dark. These are looking quite nice, but it has really dulled down to kind of a gray and not like a really dark, like I've got here. This is much darker, I think, than what's above. But what you can do, if your darks aren't dark enough, you can actually re-wet. I'll use a spray bottle and re-wet, and then I will come in with my Payne's Gray once again. So my Payne's Gray is going to actually get 2 applications. Okay, so to re-wet, I don't want to brush around. I don't want to risk messing all of this up. I mean, I like how it looks. I just want to see if I can get the darks a little bit darker. So I'm going to spray this. It actually looks darker on screen than it does in person, but I'm going to spray this fairly generously because I want to wet the surface again. And by spraying, you're not moving paint around. You're just wetting the surface. So the spray bottle is very helpful for this. Okay, nice and wet. Once again, I'm going to come into my deepest Payne's Gray that I can. Not a really runny puddle over here. Just going to come in right underneath all of that. Remember, I'm going to tip it so it's going to flow downwards, so I don't need to fill in everything that I did. I'm just going to kind of hit the top of these darks. You can see I'm getting a lot darker in there. Okay, so, whoa, watch it tilt. And if it's going too far, just tilt it back. Most of it's going to go right back to where it came from. Now, I think I'm just going to let this sit for a second before I tilt it because it's obviously flowing way too fast. So it's knowing what to do and how to tilt and all of that sort of thing that's really going to be helpful, I think, when you sit down to do yours. But I'm just going to let that sit for a moment. I'm going to wipe off this tape while I'm waiting. I also put a couple of links to some of the other demos that I've done on Northern Lights in my comments below the video here, so you can check those out if you want to. One is cards. Actually, they're different techniques that I've used on both of these. One of them is more of a lifting out technique, and the other is a little bit similar to this, but I didn't include any of the mountains. So we'll hang around until we get to the mountains because that's going to be the fun part. All right, so let's tilt this again, see if it's going to flow, but not out of control. Okay, so it's flowing pretty good. If I need it to flow more in a particular area, a light mist, not too close, will get that paint flowing. Now okay, let's say, for example, you do something and it's like, oh no, I've lost all of my Northern Lights. Not all is lost. It's not a ruined piece of paper. Take some paper towel and a damp cloth. So let's just blot this off to make it a thirsty paper towel or thirsty brush. And you can pull up some of this to get back some of that light, right? So let's say I want to have a little bit more through here. I'm just wiping this off. I'm picking up and wiping off. Don't do too much of this though, because it will kind of you'll lose the intensity of the color if you do too much of this. But you can get some of this back if you need it back. Just use your brush and pull it out. This is a flat brush I'm using, a large flat. What size is this? 3/4 inch. Right, so you can come into any of these. Just make sure you wipe it every time. Keep rinsing it off once in a while. But you can see I can get quite a lot of color back if I need it. There we go. I'm not going to play with this too much. I don't want to get into danger or anything like that, but maybe a little bit down here in the reflection. And that's about all I'm going to do. Okay, so let's set that aside. Once again, I have to make sure this is good and dry. So I'll just quickly dry this with my heat tool. Now my darks are going to be nice and dark, and I don't have to worry about it not looking like night. If you can do it without lifting, that's the best in my opinion. So the key is to get your Payne's Gray inky, but not too runny. Right now it just kind of looks like a mess. A nice colorful mess, but it's and it doesn't matter the pattern. It really doesn't. They could be lines that go up, they could be lines that zigzag across, they could be horizontal lines. Northern Lights are constantly changing. So I've many versions of Northern Lights. And none of them are wrong. My paper's feeling flatter. It's certainly hot because this is a heat tool, not a regular hair dryer. So it's getting really hot, which means probably should wait until it cools off a little bit. But the next thing I'm going to be using is some white. So I'm going to be using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, but white gouache, white watercolor, any of those will work just fine. And for this, I'm going to use my small fan brush. My little small fan brush is my very favorite spattering tool. I like it better than a toothbrush, which tends to fling a lot of the color. And sometimes it looks like it's a burst of color instead of these little dots, right? So the technique is this. You dip it into your white paint. My brush is damp. I dip it into my white paint here. Make sure it's not got excess on it. And I hold it parallel to the paper, close to the paper. And then I'll use something like the handle of my palette knife. And I can get really nice, fine, controlled dots for my stars. I'm keeping them focused in the dark areas because, of course, that's where you're going to see them most. Which is something it's really hard to do if you're using just a toothbrush for your spattering. So by holding this close, what happens is I'm tapping it. The little white droplets come up and then they fall down again. So they pretty much go up and down in the same spot. So if I hold the fan brush over the area, I will be able to pretty much control where this goes. I like this technique. So, there we go. Lots of little fine, delicate spatters. Not a lot in my Northern Lights, but a lot in my darks. So that's my all-time favorite way of putting on stars. Now, let's talk about the mountains. So for the mountains, we're going to need either your palette knife with a flat edge, or you're going to be using a credit card or something like that. So I'm going to be using, let me use this same brush. This is a number 12 round brush. I'm using my Payne's Gray, once again, nice and strong here. And I'm going to put my horizon line here because it's got to be between these two echoing lines. So if I need a really straight line, I could use a piece of tape across here. The danger is that sometimes when you use tape, you end up, it will seep underneath, especially if you're using fairly wet color. Especially if you've also wet your paper and painted on it previously. So I'm just going to eyeball this. I could use a ruler and draw a line on there to go by, but let's just live on the edge. So I'm going to run this along here, make my straight line. Well, it's not quite straight. It's a little bit angled, but we'll straighten that out. Okay. Sort of straight. Okay, so I'm going to use more of this color. Now, this is something that you're going to have to get used to working fairly quick with, because timing is going to be very important here. Keep the top of the mountain nice and wet. So I'm going to do some faraway mountains, and then I'll do some closer mountains. So for the closer mountains, of course, they're going to be larger. In fact, maybe I can bring it down like this and bring it down a little further. Maybe that's a possibility. Because I get to make this up, right? Let's bring that across. Make sure you're covering up any stars. You don't want stars on your mountain. That would be a little weird. And so this is good strong color. Keep all of this wet. Go back and re-wet it if it needs to be. If you need to keep it wet, go back to it. Re-wet it with more color. Okay, when this gets to what I call the tacky stage, right? So the paint is starting to set up and really create its, lose its shine and things like that. Let me show you how much shine is on there right now. You can see it's all pretty wet. Now I'm going to start. I need to have a paper towel ready. I'm going to start near the top of the mountain and do the ones behind first. This is important. And I'm pressing on the blade so I can put pressure on the blade. And I'm going to scrape away my mountain. And as I do this, I'm going in different directions because, of course, that's the way mountains will work. They go from the peak down. Get right up to the peak because, you know, that's where you're going to have snow and stuff. Right. I made a mark there that I didn't want, so let's just change my mountain. How about that? Fix that pretty easy. Make these ones a little taller. Make sure these stay wet. Right. If you go in too soon, you're going to really find that you're just kind of moving the paint around on the surface. You want to get to that tacky stage where the paint's beginning to set up a little bit. And I'm just trying to follow the angles of the mountain, you know, creating it as I go kind of thing. So now the closer one, let's go from the top. didn't want to go there. So let's wipe that off. Find an angle that works for you, and let's do, I think I'll put that big one in the back instead of the front. There we go. Just scraping away, and this is giving me the feeling of, you know, those cliffs and things like that. Play around with it, just have some fun with it, and see if you can get the angles of things. Let me lighten this screen up a little bit. It looks to me like you're not seeing everything that I'm doing here, but if I lighten this up, you'll see where I've done a lot of the scraping. So just give me a second. There you go. Now you can see the rock face of the mountain and all of that. You can manipulate that around a little bit. So what am I going to do here? Will I do a reflection? I think I will. So your reflection, here's what I do. I always line up my eyesight right in line with, like, my eye is right above this mountain. That way I'm not going to have everything angled, right? If I line my eyesight up with the actual mountain there, and I'm going to come in and replicate that peak there, the second peak, which is a little higher. I'm going to lose a lot of my Northern Lights reflection in there, but I think that's going to be okay. So I'm coming in pretty dark here. Then this mountain. Line it up here. That's the peak. Lots of color in here. All right, so I've got my reflections of the mountain. Of course, they're going to need a little bit of scraping as well. Still a little bit wet. I can feel that the paint is still kind of pooling around a little bit. Vicky says, I tried one of your earlier Northern Lights demos, a very refreshing exercise for a control freak. Yes, I'm a little bit of a control freak myself, so I can relate, but it's kind of fun to let loose once in a while and just really see what watercolor can do. I think that's a lot of fun. Tricky to echo exactly what you did, but I'm trying to replicate like that. That's like a mirror image kind of thing, as best as I can anyway. right, let's wipe off this tape here. It's getting a lot of paint buildup on it, so let's wipe that off so it doesn't give us problems. And you can see, maybe you can see the shine. See, you can see where I've scraped it, and so there's more paint buildup there. It's drier where I've scraped it, and that's giving me my mountain effect. Pretty easy way of doing a mountain. So I'm going to dry this, and I think I'm going to add in some trees as well into this one. You can really do this any size you want. If you wanted to make these into like cards or something like that, that would be pretty easy to do as well. I do have the one video on painting on the ready-made watercolor cards that you can buy. I'm not in love with that kind of paper, but you could do this on like a 4x6 or something like that, small size or mini size, and then attach it to a card. That would work just as well. I'll often do that with, you know, failed paintings or paintings that I've just used for exercises or something like that. And then the back's perfectly good, so I'll use the back to do a different painting on. Almost there. Now, the palette knife is a great way to create rock texture, and so therefore it's natural for things like mountains. Now, the thing that I don't like about this really is that it almost looks like the snowy parts of the mountain come right down to the water, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm going to put some trees along the bottom of these mountains. Didn't want to worry about that while I was trying to do my scraping. But I can add the trees in very easily just using some Payne's Gray. At nighttime, you're not going to see a lot of colors, things like that. You're going to see mostly silhouette kind of stuff. So let's say, for example, this shoreline here. We have a number of trees, you know, in British Columbia, or the Western Canada, you've got these really tall cedar type trees, and they're often at the lower climates of the mountains, like the lower parts of the mountain. So in a couple of places you could have like a few little bits of tree that come in there. You're not going to see all that much, but it's going to be enough that you'll see, oh, those are trees. You know, you're going to see those reflections, that those are right up against the water. Maybe even here. The trick is to echo it, like to make it exactly, like to look like it is actually a reflection. But most of this is along the shoreline. Now, I might even have more shore somewhere. So let's say, for example, right here, maybe we'll put another shoreline right here, down here in the corner. This is where you get to just play and invent and create your own. Now, this would obviously be closer. I could do a very large tree here, maybe taller than the mountain, which of course it's not taller than the mountain. It's just that I'm close to it. So let's do an interesting tree here. So we'll do kind of a straight line. And we'll do this cedar type tree here. Quite tall, fairly dense as well, and there will be a few sky holes showing through there, so got to come down through the mountain as well. Nice rich color. You really don't want to have to do it twice, so might as well load up your brush with good rich color in the first place. That'd be a lot, save yourself a lot of grief. It gets a little fatter as it comes out down here. And of course, you're never going to see one of these by themselves, so you're going to have some other ones as well. And yeah, I'm kind of covering up some of my mountain there, but I'm creating the whole scene, right? The whole 9 yards, the feeling of it all being there. Every one I do is just a little different than the previous one. It's never exactly the same. And of course, your Northern Lights don't have to have mountains. They could have a cabin. They could have just trees. They could have a lake. You know, it's up to you. Whatever you want to do. But I wanted to include a little bit of the water element here, just so that you could see how I would approach the, you know, the reflection kind of thing going on here. I'm going to bring some of these up the mountain. Some of these dark trees up the mountain. It's going to end up looking just very solid there because you're not going to see any detail at night. There we go. I think this is almost there. Let's do a little bit more right here. Yeah, I kind of like that reflection. I think I'm good with that. If you find that, oh my gosh, my reflection's way too light, I've scraped away too much, no problem. Just water down some of your Payne's gray and darken it. There, that mountain was looking a little too light, so let's darken that down. That looks a little more natural, and voila. So, could I put some snow on the tops of the mountains at this stage? You might be tempted to take your white paint and put some white on the mountains, but to be honest, at nighttime, the white on the mountains is going to be darker than the lights in the sky. The lights in the sky are the star of the show here. So where I've scraped away, believe it or not, that is actually going to be, at nighttime, that's what the white's going to look like. The snow is going to actually look that way. So I don't really need to add anything in there. If you really wanted it to look more like snow peaks, maybe fill in a little bit more at the bottom of the trees like this, so that it feels more like snow caps on the mountains instead of just rock all the way down to the water line. So if you just fill in a little bit more silhouette down here, that will feel more like snow on the mountain. So you don't really need to do more there. I would just leave it at that. If you feel like, you know, I don't like how much I want it to show more snow or something like that. Let's get a clean paper towel. I'm simply experimenting here, just as a heads up. I'm going to dampen, just with a clean brush, I'm going to dampen this mountain. and see if I can scrape any way after it has dried. So I'm softening up the paint, softening it up, and I'm going to see if I can scrape a little bit more off of that mountain to make it look more like snow. All right, palette knife. Let's get my palette knife clean. It's got a lot of paint on it. There, get that clean. Now, put pressure on the knife like this. I don't know that I can scrape a whole lot more there than I already have. Let's see if I can wet it a bit more. I don't want it lighter than my sky though. That's going to be important. It's a solid. The light does not pass through the solid, so we want to make sure that this is still darker than your northern lights. That's going to be important. I think I'm getting it a little lighter than I did. I'm going to have to turn this or use my left hand. Or not. My left hand's not that coordinated. So that, you can see I'm scraping a little more harshly here, and I can feel the paper's starting to compromise a little bit. So I don't want to go too crazy with this, but this one's a higher mountain. Looks like maybe it has a little bit of snow on it. So hopefully that gives you the right impression that you're looking for. Let's remove this tape because it looks a lot better once you remove the tape. I'll take this one off first. There we go. It always looks better without the tape, I think. For the mountain technique, I would suggest take a scrap of paper, like the back of a failed painting or something like that, and practice your scraping technique. You might find that you like using the palette knife, or no, you hate using the palette knife. You'd much rather use like a credit card or something like that. Experiment, find out what you like. My stars are more subtle than mine. What consistency did you have your white paint? Fairly... I don't know if I can show it to you, but this is pretty thick in here. And with my damp brush, it's sort of like I've got quite a lot on there, but it's not drippy. I would not drip off my brush. And the more wet you have the paint, the bigger your dots will be. It's a good idea to just take the excess. If you have got a lot in your brush, take the excess off of your fan brush before you're spattering your stars. You may find that will help you with the control a little more. But yeah, I don't overload my brush as well. So don't overdo it with the loading up. That will make a difference. Yeah, it is a moody painting, isn't it? One thing that, you might like is to maybe scrape a shoreline here. I don't know if I can do it now. I can't really do it now, but I could with my small brush. I could put just a shoreline there. And I'm not really doing much. This is with my white paint. I'm just going to put A little too white for sure. So now I'm going to just add a little water to it just to tone that down, just to show the separation between the shoreline and the mountain. Right, so put the white down, but it's too bright, so I just use a damp brush and blend that out. There. Now you can sort of see where the water starts and the mountain begins. Anyway, so I hope you have fun with that one, and I think we do have one more Wednesday before Christmas. Surely we do. I think we do. So we will see you next week again, and have a great week in the meantime. Thanks so much for joining. See you next time.